Anyway, thank you for coming and joining us this morning. It's great for me. I love doing these coffee and donuts things because it is an excuse for me to get to know entrepreneurs in the community. And as I'm sure you can imagine, we try to curate this so that we expose folks and bring folks into the public eye that may not necessarily be as well known, and frankly, we think they should. And Jenny Abramson is a great example of that. She is currently CEO of LiveSafe. It's a company that's really committed to safety, school safety. We'll undoubtedly talk about that. She's CEO of that company. Her career also includes working at large companies like the Washington Post, startups like Personal. She's been on the cutting edge of a number of really interesting trends. That would be enough for any reasonable human being, but she's also spent time working in the government. She ran the Transformation Management Office for DC Public Schools, and she was Director of Program Strategy Development for Teach for America. That's not enough. She's a Fulbright scholar as well, highly educated. I don't know why she wanted to come in and hang out with me, but she's here and it's too late. So Jenny, thank you for joining us.
I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for everyone who's not a morning person for being here at 8 o'clock. So
Well, for some of us who get up in the morning at 3 o'clock worried, this is the middle of the afternoon.
Exactly.
This is
Exactly.
like, the sun's up, I don't know what to do. So let's start with what you're up to right now. I think that LiveSafe seems like, to me, a very interesting company that combines mission and purpose as well as an opportunity to make money. So tell us some about the business and how you came to it.
Sure. We started from the notion that in all the school shootings that were happening, and many of you probably read about them or see them on the front page. I think there was one every 2 weeks in the last year. It's actually gotten to be so regular, people don't hear about them. 80% of the time after the shooting, someone said they knew something beforehand and just didn't tell, just didn't feel like it was their place or they weren't sure. Similarly, all the sexual assault issues that are in the news now every day, with 1 in 5 women on college campuses being assaulted, 88% of the time, no one tells anyone. And so it felt like we were depending on people to call the police to tell about these issues, when in reality, most people, especially students, won't call their parents. And if we could use the mobile phones that every student had and every person uses, and instead let them do something that's much more text-like, allows anonymity, and actually gets a response, because a lot of times people don't go to public safety because nothing comes back to them. We wanted to see if that would lower the barriers to sharing. And we launched publicly sort of in market last September and found that it actually really did. And so it's grown much faster than we expected, and has been touching everything from a gun tip to a sexual assault to my lights out on my walk home and it makes me nervous.
It is an interesting sort of commentary on society that people are crazed right now about Ebola, but it sounds to me like what you're involved in is a much greater crisis or a much greater problem for actual safety for people. Is that right?
I probably shouldn't, get the people upset at me, but
no, I do that every week
but I think this is a huge crisis. I think that the good news is people are inherently good, and if they're empowered with the right tools, they will actually try to make a difference. And we're seeing that, and now we're in 18 states around the country. We've grown very fast. We've doubled in size since June alone. We're starting to work in military bases, and we're actually seeing that it works. So that's the good side. But we have a lot more places to get to, and getting there quickly is always a challenge.
Now, how is this different from, say, some of the, I was going to say wrong, I don't know if that's the right company anymore, but the text alert companies that let you know if there's an emergency in the university? How's this different from that?
So we like to think of ourselves as everything from doing nothing until calling 911. And that there's this whole scope of things that's in that window that no one ever does, or most people don't do anything about. So we're still thrilled if someone has a mass alert text company, whether it's a university or otherwise, to, in a shooter situation, have them one-way push notification to the people who need to know the information. We're much more about, one, the stuff that can prevent the issues long before it's an emergency, and two, we're about two-way communication. So really it's about chatting back and forth and gathering information.
So your platform allows basically what it sounds to me like what you're doing is you're crowdsourcing safety from the standpoint of trying to capture attitudes of whether or not people feel safe.
People feel safe, it's almost see something, say something, but a modern day version. So really capturing what people are seeing and then helping to get around it.
That's a fairly positive thing. So, looking at your background, you've been involved in identity management, media, things like that. How did you come to this particular business?
Good question. I was at a dinner one night, and I was a woman, Catherine Bradley, who some of you may know, who really makes an impact in DC public school education, brought together a bunch of CEOs in this area. I was actually at the time not a CEO, I was just an executive, and but had worked in education to figure out how to fix education was sort of the purpose. So we were in this sort of fancy.
So you were there for a month?
No, it was literally a night.
And you fixed it?
And we didn't fix it.
Oh.
But we were all
I was
informed.
hoping.
And while there, I was sitting next to someone who was an early investor and on the board, and we were talking about LiveSafe.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's really interesting. You should do this, you should do this. And next thing I knew, I thought I was sort of sneakily going to be a great advisor to the company. And a few months later, somehow I was coming in right as we were sort of going to go to market. And so I was very lucky, is I guess what I would say.
Well, my experience of luck is that we all make our luck in some ways by getting away. If you hadn't been at that dinner, because of the work you were then doing, and if you hadn't had the brain to be able to express yourself in a way that created the impression that you had a strategic mind, and on and on. And I actually find that most entrepreneurs I know that are successful are lucky in some ways. I know so many entrepreneurs, and the biggest difference between the ones that are worth $1 gazillion or have a big win, it's zigged when it couldn't zag, and there is luck. But I don't think that anybody is lucky from the standpoint of not making their own luck in some way. What do you think of that?
Good question. I do think that you can impact your, I'm one of personal responsibility. You can actually make something happen, maybe to a fault, and that my teams probably I think we can actually make anything we want happen. But I do think luck can also play a great role. So I am a fan of you can impact things. Yeah.
I am too, and every entrepreneur that I've interviewed since I started doing this 2.5 years ago has a similar characteristic, a belief that can influence the universe in a positive way. I've never met an entrepreneur who thinks that it just kind of happens.
Yes, no, I definitely don't.
So this is the first time you've been CEO? So
I ran a bunch of startups within the Washington Post company,
Mhm.
but it was all under a corporate umbrella. So in some ways it was more similar than I would have thought, actually being on the outside and inside, but in other ways it's different.
So for all of us, what's it like to be a CEO? How would you describe it for somebody who maybe hasn't had the experience? What were the biggest things that surprised you about becoming the CEO?
Good question. I actually think it's really fun because
Really?
you can focus on the areas that you're best at, and you can fill holes in areas that you're not as good at by hiring great people, and decide sort of resource allocation, which to me is one of the biggest parts of my job. So I like that a lot. I think it is intense because there's always more to do, and I'm sure everyone feels that way in their jobs, but I think there is just always more that you can be doing, and you can see where you want to get, and time is the biggest barrier to that in terms of your time. And so I think that's the other piece. But I'd say those are probably the two things that jump out.
For me, I think I've had times in my life where literally my job description changed overnight, and I'll share with you. So I was a venture capital lawyer for a long time, and then I decided I wanted to start Amplifier back in 2004. And one week I was a partner law firm, and the next week I had a fund, and all of a sudden my jokes were funnier. And it's true. I mean, it's really interesting.
I don't know if they're kissing up to me as much.
Well, no, it's interesting.
That's
Well, but it's fascinating how in our society certain titles signal certain attributes, and VCs in this market in particular have positioned themselves as the crown prince of technology, which I've spent the last 10 years fighting against valiantly. But did you have that moment where you looked to your right and looked to your left and you realized, you know what, I'm the person who has to make a decision?
Good question. I think I have, for better or worse, I've always felt that way. So maybe more than I should have. I always sort of felt in any business I was sort of running, even if it was for someone else, that I had to make the decision, and that comes with a level of pressure that might not always be great, but also empowerment feeling. So I'd say that wasn't a huge change, but I do think this feeling of it does, at the end of the day, it doesn't go well, it's on you, and if it goes well, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's the slightly different thing. There's no one else to blame, right? If it gets screwed up, it'll be me.
Yeah, I found that was probably the thing that was the strangest for me as well, because when you become head of an organization, it's very lonely in a way, isn't it? Because when you're part of a founding team or somebody else is in charge, you're all in together, you're hanging out, going to each other with problems. But I find that the further and higher up you get, it becomes more lonely. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I don't know if I have time to be lonely, but I might get lonely. No, I know what you mean. No, I know exactly what you mean.
You have to be able to feel comfortable making decisions and dealing with the consequences on your own, and times making decisions without really being able to work it through with anybody that truly understands the fact that spouses, you can't. No. Spouses are great.
My poor spouse has to hear anymore. I won't be there.
And Veronica, same with me. And she's in it, and she's. I say that every startup is a family business, right? Because you go home at the end of the day, and there's nobody else to talk to about this. You talk with your significant others or your kids. Right. It's very interesting. I teach family business over at Maryland. How many children of family businesses ultimately join the family business?
Oh, my 6-year-old's sure that she's going to work with me. So.
You better be nice to her now.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think you're right. Although I do think boards can play a good role in that, and advisors. We've been really fortunate that we have an advisory board of everyone from the former head of the U.S. Secret Service to a woman who was the highest-ranking female in the FBI to a former university president, actually at George Mason, and those folks have actually turned out to be really good advisors to me, in that they're just close enough to us to know what the heck they're talking about, and far enough away that they, don't have a personal stake in such a huge way.
So, with respect to people who are thinking about starting their own business or working in a business, would you say that having advisors who are truly interested in mentoring is the most important thing?
I think it's probably 3 things in terms of advisors. One are those that will bring credibility to the work that you're doing as a company, and those that really, can help in the beginning show people that you actually do know what you're talking about, or they wouldn't have put their name on it. I think the second is those that you can mentor, and I think the third is those that actually have good ideas and can be creative thought partners beyond mentoring, just sort of creative ideas and thought partners to grow the business. So those have been, at least for me, what I like to. I think a lot of companies either overpromise a set of things from advisors that it creates a lot of work for them. And in our case, if an advisor turns out not to do much or isn't helpful, there's no obligation to not that that's the case of any of our advisors.
No, I think that in this world we are judged much more than I think we realize by the company we keep. I think it's so important. And
I think that's right.
Right? And
people always assumed I was smarter because of the school I went to than I was.
Well, exactly. I had the same problem. You look around and think, these people are really smart. Except for me, well, you spent time in England as well at the LSE, as did I. And I'll never forget being a kid from middle-class family in Philadelphia, showing up my first night, going to a black tie dinner and being confronted with 27 pieces of silverware on the table and not knowing where to begin.
That happened to me, actually.
Not knowing where to begin. My family, if there was a spoon, it was a meal.
That's really funny.
Well,
at Stanford, they told us our first day, look left, look right. One person in here was randomly selected. Their application was selected without us ever reading it. So just know that could have been you. Was sort of the first thing I heard from the head of admissions. It stuck with me for a while.
See, if that was me, I'm like, yes! Well, that's really interesting, because you think about how many of us in the world of entrepreneurship suffer from a little bit of the imposter syndrome. How did this become me? I can just imagine a place like Stanford or somebody that's, that there are at least half the people in the room are saying, oh, that was me.
Right, I'm sure.
It's really interesting. So, let's go back a little bit in time. What happened, or when did you develop the personality of wanting to be a leader?
Question.
I'm sorry,
but
not an uncomfortable question.
No, it's a perfectly good question. No, it's all good. Do you want the honest answer?
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, Trisha's there tweeting it all out, so let's
I went to a wonderful school. It was actually the first racially integrated school in Washington. I grew up in DC. I went to the first racially integrated school. It was started by a bunch of parents during a time where, kids didn't, black and white kids didn't go to school together. And the whole philosophy of the school was about sort of empowering you to make a difference in the world, and that anything was possible, and there was no hierarchy. Teachers were called by their first name, still are. Everything was about sort of, you have great talents, figure out what they are, and go do something with them. And so, I think that really melded with just who I was, and both my parents were people. My mom started the first ever women's venture capital fund to invest only in women-owned businesses because they weren't getting capital. My dad had done a bunch of work politically in the city as a sort of white person who did work with, as the only white person doing work in a space that mostly wasn't. And so I guess it would be I was the typical president of my high school, whatever you want to call it. And I think being in that environment made me not only lead in there, but I started an I Have a Dream program. Or when there was a gun shooting at my high school, someone was shot who went to my high school, I started a program to teach about guns in the inner city. So in my sophomore year in high school, I was off working in the inner city, actually teaching handgun control. And so I think at different points it manifests itself in different ways, but I think there was always this feeling of, if there's a problem, you should fix it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And hearing you tell that story, I hadn't really ever thought about this, but my experience was similar. And I grew up, went to a school that integrated back in the 60s. Played basketball, was the only white guy on the team playing ball in a very poor neighborhood. And then I grew up, and my mom owned an art gallery in the middle of Philadelphia, which is a very large gay community. So it's like so much of the stuff that seems to segment our country right now is it was just a tapestry of life.
That's what it was. Yeah.
So that's, trying to think, with respect to all this that came together, is your life unfolding the way you imagined it was going to unfold?
I don't know if I had a picture. I tend to sort of think one step ahead. I'm not sure I think 10 steps ahead. So I'm very focused on whatever I'm doing, trying to make it successful. I don't have, if you ask me what do I want to do in 10 years, hopefully LiveSafe will be growing and huge, and we'll be in all states, not 18 states and other things. But I would say I'm not sure I had a picture. I know I want to make an impact somewhere in the world, and I happen to be better at business than I am at most things. And so the combination of those two, when I went back to business school, that was never what I would have predicted. I thought I would teach maybe, or elementary in the inner city. I had gotten a fellowship when I was at Stanford to teach in the inner city because I was big advocate of standardized testing is often discriminates against different folks, and realized just how bad a teacher I would be. I mean, these 7th grade girls were like eating me for lunch. I was just a disaster. And so I quickly realized at that point, my next summer I did investment banking as my internship. So I
I've been an investment banker myself. I can tell you, if you can deal with 7-year-olds, 7th graders.
That was actually easy.
There's nothing as bitchy as a bunch of 50-year-old male investment bankers.
So I interned right here at FBR. Some of you may remember. So I think that was. But I do think I shifted a lot between private and public sector, and I've always shifted back and forth because I like the work in the private sector, but I am a cause-driven person, so I think that's been the one sort of pattern that I've had.
It's funny you mentioned those two experiences. I've often thought that everything that I ever learned about group dynamics, I learned in my nursery school sandbox. What do you think?
I like that. Well, I'm now that I'm talking about all my childhood schools, beyond Georgetown Day School, my nursery school, Little Folks was, it's actually good. Little Folks was my nursery school, and I'm still very close to the head of it, who was my teacher, who my kids have had, which is great. And their whole theory was it's all about learning how to interact with other people and not academics. So while your kids might get to kindergarten and not know what other kids know in terms of reading or anything else, they actually socially are much more adjusted. So I would say that whatever they had me polishing blocks or whatever I was doing, I actually really liked it. But so I actually think nursery school may have been helpful.
No, it's really interesting. I think back to, and I channel back in my mind that sandpit, and when I think about little Jimmy over there beating Larry with the hammer,
So your whole success is you weren't beating anyone.
I was the one in the middle trying to make everybody get along. Exactly. And here we are. So I just keep back at the same pattern while Larry hits me with the hammer. Yeah. It's okay.
It's really funny.
You're going to make me cry, but that's good. So you have this business now.
Yeah.
You're solving a big social problem. Your customer is a university, a state. Who is your customer?
Well, this is actually a part if you guys have customers to send our way. No,
Yeah,
it's primarily universities. We have it maybe the president of a university, the deans of students, anyone who sees at a university that the sort of culture and feeling of safety really matters will buy LiveSafe, and it's a SaaS-based model, so they basically pay a per-user fee. And that's our core customer. And then we provide them with ability to communicate with everyone who has the app on the one side. The students have an app. They have a back-end cloud-based dashboard, and they can communicate. And so, and we give them statistics, sort of aggregated data, so they can really make different decisions, whether it's to redeploy someone on a day that a lot of crime information is coming in or anything else. So that's our real customer. We do also work outside of education. We're at Andrews Air Force Base, for example. As some have probably read, there's a lot of sexual assault issues in the military, and trying to be able to report something outside of your chain of command is important to them. And then we have companies, so we have work that we're doing where a company might want every employee to have a now LiveSafe app that allows people to anonymously share information and get help when they need it on different topics.
So it could be in a way like Secret, the app that's gotten probably more publicity than it should have. But could this ultimately become an anonymous communication platform so that if I'm the CEO of a company, I can get a sense of what people are actually thinking?
Absolutely.
Interesting. So does this have you tried to sell this to the federal government?
That's a good question. So we are in many conversations. I will be honest, it is always hard to know whether it's about to happen and be a game-changing thing or won't ever happen, and then 10 years later we'll have wasted a huge amount of time. So I definitely would welcome any advice, but I think one of the big open questions for me is how much time do you invest in something that people keep saying is perfect, but you just need to meet these 5 more people, these 10 more people, and how much time to invest in that when it is a fit. It completely fits with how we're used in university settings, for example, military campuses, Navy, whatever you want to call it, but it's unclear.
Well, you would think, for example, that every embassy and consulate around the world should have this application.
I think embassies are a great use case. I mean, I think the best use cases are groups of people, ideally where there are safety officials that are connected to that institution who can respond to tips, chat back and forth. We do have a feature called Safe Walk that allows users to communicate with each other. So I'm walking home late at night, I'm nervous, I might send my husband a safe walk, and he can see where I am on a map and chat with me at the same time. And that's been very, very popular. But safety officials are required for the others.
So, so you talk about the federal government. How is its sales cycle different from the university sales cycle or the just selling to a corporation?
With universities, it feels like it's such a big need that while you always hear the horror stories of it takes at least a year to sell something to schools, our cycle has been more like 3 to 6 months. I think they see it when we've been on the news. A president of a university will see it and say, I need that, and I don't want to wait till September, I want that in 2 weeks. So they don't always happen that way. Arizona State University, Georgetown University, it took a little longer. But I'd say it's been a faster sales cycle than I would have expected. On the government side, it's too early to tell, but I could see it being, they're planning FY 2016 now, right? So when you're in startup world, I think they, in theory, want to work with startups. I actually think there's a great partnership to be had, but I think in startup world, thinking about 2016 is like thinking about when you're 90 years old.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a lot of what TandemNSI is spending time from a policy perspective and advocating within the Department of Defense primarily. There are a growing number of programs that want to interact with innovative entrepreneurs, but we've got to help them get the contract vehicles in place. That's the big problem, is that they don't know how to contract with businesses like yours. So it falls down to they'll meet with you really intrigued, but then they have to find a program of record and somebody to shoehorn you into, and all of a sudden you're subbing to Lockheed Martin, which is completely different from where you want to be as an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Well, we should definitely continue that dialogue because I think what you described is a use case of the kind of problem we want to solve.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
We welcome all the help we
See,
can
I
get
just
if
made a
anyone
commitment to
knows.
her. Adam's
Exactly.
thinking, do we help? Yeah, right? You'll remember. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking just as an aside, Department of State, for example, State Department did a competition over the summer looking for non-traditional performers to solve problems. I don't know whether that even raised on your radar screen. I would have thought, and we'll follow up afterwards, or how to connect dots, that they should know about this program.
Right.
But that's a great example of what we're fighting against. So thanks for sharing that. I have other questions, but do you all have any? I don't want to shortchange you all if you have questions you'd like to ask. Mister.
Quick question. So if you buy the idea that the quintessential difference between a startup CEO and the CEO of an established organization is the extent to which one is engaged in innovation, iteration, occasionally pivoting versus optimization and driving efficiencies to proven processes, where do you see yourself
Yep.
in your company right now along that continuum?
That's great. David, where are you from?
TM Technologies.
It's funny. I introduced myself. I was randomly invited to a board director summit for a venture capital fund in this area. That I stood up and introduced myself as a startup CEO, and the guy who was one of the partners who had asked me to come corrected me and said, "No, you're a growth CEO." So the short answer is I'm not sure I'm accurate, but what I would say is we are sort of in the in-between. We are moving from the phase one, where phase zero is the guys in the garage. Phase one is you have something, you actually start to make some money from it, but you're not really sure. And I think phase two is where you start to say, okay, we actually have to stop trying everything, and we have to spend at least our core 80% on something, and maybe we dabble with 10 or 20% over here in case something hits, and
Discovering new use cases.
Yeah, there still are other use cases. We realize that we have 2 NBA basketball teams using us, right? If we had cut off all of the other 20%, we wouldn't see a cash, opportunity that would have been there. So sort of really being open to that, because the pivot is still always possible, but being very disciplined about what does that mean. So in our case, we put sales resources there, but we don't put product resources there. Really picking our product stuff on our core, which is education.
So I've looked at this a lot of different ways as an investor, a mentor, as a professor of this, and the best way to think about it from my perspective is a startup isn't really a business. A startup is an organized activity to discover a business. And people who are good at doing that are not necessarily the same people who are good at the next step, which is once you've identified the business, you have the initial, all right, well, let's go to market and see if there's a business. And that's a different skill set. People that are good at the first aren't necessarily good at the second, but they can overlap. I've seen many startup founders go from product business discovery to initial customers. And the really good founders imprint the organization with their values and create a culture that can resonate from their strengths and their weaknesses and start to imprint the organization. The next challenge is the leader of an organization that has achieved its initial sales. Now you have to scale. And scaling is a real challenge because you can no longer manage through informal discussions. You can no longer create culture through informal interactions. In other words, once you get past about 7 or 8 people, you have to start to create structure. You have to create, and structure is things like the right management information system, the right compensation system, the right training. And I've seen many entrepreneurs completely and utterly scale out there. And my guess is that, having been an investor for a long time, been in the industry now for almost 20 years, in a VC's mind, they see you and say, you understand how to create the organizational structure, which is why you're a growth CEO. The next challenge, and this is the challenge that companies have forever, basically, it's the challenge of, if it's going really well, how do you continue to grow? You grow by abandoning what you're doing and go completely someplace else, or you continue to grow by doing adjacent strategy. And that is, if everybody knew how to do that, we'd all be rich. That's probably the biggest challenge of all. And if you ever want to have real world example of that? Look at Eastman Kodak. Eastman Kodak invented digital photography, but they didn't do it because they decided to stay in the film business. Compare them with Netflix. Who's going to take DVDs anymore? Let's go online. Oh, the studios aren't going to give us the videos anymore. We'll do our own content. Watch what Rhee Hastings does, the strategy. So I would say at the end of the day, though, the one thing that all effective CEOs have all the way along is an ability to lead. Management becomes important, but lead, set values, set expectations, communicate vision, and imprint.
Yeah.
Culture starts and ends with you.
Yes. I think that's right. I think everyone plays a role in it, but we did an offsite in July where we sat and talked about our values, right? Because when you're 7 people or even 5 people, you don't have to talk about the values. You all sort of have them, and you wouldn't be working together if you didn't. As you start to hire outside people, you need to hire for fit, not just for skill set. And I'd say for me, what's helped me most in past roles and past jobs has been my ability to hire well. And so hiring people who both have a lot of talent, are willing to work hard and fit culturally, and yet bring a new perspective is a tough balance, I think, in getting that right. But it is very hard, as you say, to sort of shift an organization down that spectrum.
It's just about impossible, I think. And this is another reason why I find that the most successful VCs are the ones who figure out how to keep the founder involved in the business or keep the visionary involved. There's nothing as bad as the disconnect between an organization that has certain values and a CEO brought in who doesn't share those values. For example, when I think back to Carly Fiorina coming into Hewlett-Packard, heavy engineer-driven culture, geeky kind of thing. No, we're in a commodity business. And that company, and she merged with Compaq, that company rejected her like anybody's rejecting a virus. Or we're watching Tim Cook's troubles with Apple, succeeding Steve Jobs.
I think it's a tough balance. I think, we had an early group of founders who were the ones in the garage. I wasn't in the garage, and we were starting this. I came in what I would call sort of a founding team in that first year of going to market, but I'm not the founder or in the way some traditional founding CEOs are. And I think trying to find that balance of how do you take the best of what's there, but also scale it, and when it doesn't work, being okay that some people aren't going to always be right for the next phase is, I think, an important thing to think about at all times.
Another question. Yes, sir.
Are you at Virginia Tech or UVA yet?
It's a great question. We're at Virginia Tech. One of our early co-founder employees actually was shot in the Virginia Tech shootings in 2007, and had been the second set of shootings, and there had been so many pieces of data along the way that, if you had something like LiveSafe, it might have made a difference. And UVA, it's interesting, we're at almost, half of the schools in Virginia. We're at Old Dominion, we're at, you name it, we're there. Shenandoah's of the private schools. We are not at UVA. They don't have something like us. We would love to be there, in light of obviously everything that's happened. The Safe Walk feature we have that allows you, instead of texting your friend, to send a safe walk and see where they are on the map, I think could be helpful for a lot of incidents that are, happening. So we really welcome being there.
Yeah, they've lost 2 students in a similar way.
So, but I know they've got a lot on their plate, so we've tried to, but we think it'd be a great school to serve.
Well, related to that, how do you think about marketing in a context like that?
Yeah.
Obviously, we all know what you're referring to. How do you market without being
Opportunistic
without being disrespectful?
Yeah.
And culture, and I think it's an issue. Could you talk about culture with respect to that?
I think our goal is we're a mission-driven organization. And at the end of the day, our purpose is to make our world safer. And that's what drives those of us who are here. We hire for people who care about that. It's why we do what we do. We believe that there is a double bottom line and that the two go hand in hand, but especially in terms of ongoing sustainability. But I think that's where it comes from. And I think that we're fortunate in that we don't have to be opportunistic about those moments. There's enough people who see what we're doing, or we have the chief of police at VCU who said, I get 10 times the number of tips since I've been working with you. Our crime is down 40% in the last year. Now, I don't think we deserve all the credit for that, but he's been publicly sort of saying things. So I think if enough people hear that that using LiveSafe, there's a million apps out there. We're much more than an app. We're a back end, and we're actually get information from students. And Georgetown University made an arrest last week because of a LiveSafe tip. They came in and they tweeted it. So I think the more we can get other people to share their experiences, and then have people we meet who, you never know. Someone's on the board of a school and calls. Someone knows someone. The more that they are able to go in at the right levels in the universities and say, you really should be doing this, and help the university feel okay that this isn't something they need a committee for 12 months to look at, because sometimes if you hear the word app or you hear whatever, you think, oh, I better get a committee together. This isn't that. This is a really unique thing. I think having Barry Diller join our board and IAC Invest helped, I think, begin to send a signal that, and Blackboard looked at everything in this market and picked LiveSafe as sort of the best technology in the mobile safety space after a lot of analysis. So I think those things send some clues and signals, but ultimately it really comes down to people we know, reaching out, writing letters, calling people. I think there's more we could do to get students involved. At University of West Virginia, it was actually the student government that unanimously passed to have LiveSafe come to their campus, despite the fact that the administration hadn't approved that. And it was on the front page of a local paper, and it made it very hard for them not to adopt LiveSafe. So I think we could probably do more to sort of create that momentum that we have.
Who's snipping at your heels from a product standpoint?
Yeah, I'd say there's a few buckets. I think there's always apps out there for everything. I mean, there's an app for ordering pizza. There's an app for everything. So I have no doubt there'll be 10, 20 apps that sort of say they allow you to submit tips, allow you to do other things. There's yet to be something that actually gets used by people that has the user experience, and we're fortunate that we've got really good UI people, and we've got people like IAC and Barry Diller who run companies like Match.com and OkCupid and Tinder and Vimeo and others to learn from. So I think that's a big differentiator. It's not just about the technology, it's about does it get used. I'd say there's the blue light companies, so you might know those big blue poles on college campuses. They're a huge business. I mean, people spend, I don't know, $1 million, whatever it is, and in most schools we've talked to, no one uses them anymore. They're as much for parents to feel good. And maybe they serve a deterrent effect, but I think that's in some ways a competition, right? Because it's a huge part of a market that we're in that makes a lot of money. And then I think the mass alert companies are about one-way mass texting, but might they have a free app or do something? Sure. Again, it may not get used, but if someone just wants to check a box and say they've done something, there are a lot of options out there to do it. I think we're good for the places, which luckily there's enough of, who really actually want to get information and get in front of things.
Yeah, and I would think that in most of those cases, it's all about the programmatic stuff that happens after the technology is available and the box has been checked. And if you're not completely integrated somehow into the DNA of the way the culture of the school works and all that kind of stuff, then that, I would think, that's got to be a huge part of your strategy.
And we have an engagement management team, and what they do is they're dedicated to a given school, and they help roll it out, give the tweets, everything that the school needs to get going.
So there's something out there that I want to drill down a little bit with you on. It seems to me that in the world of the internet is unbelievably effective in allowing us to create new businesses with almost frictionless distribution. But by the same token, it means that a lot of the traditional models we learn about in business school about how to create competitive barriers, you can't use. So how do you create competitive barriers for an internet business like this that when you cut through it all, anybody could think of?
Yep.
How do you protect yourself?
I think that it is very different than it probably used to be. I think that it's really about creating excellence. And if you are excellent and you get 50 clients who all believe that you're fantastic, and that's not just the technology working, it's about continually innovating. It's about having the right team and the people who support them. It's the whole piece, the whole package. And if you do that, I think it is harder and harder for other people to replicate it. I think it's this balance, which is you should look at your competition because there's great ideas out there, but you should also not be sitting there obsessing about your competition. You should be focusing that energy on just continually getting better and doing everything you can to be the best at what you are.
I think that is really important, and we should make sure that we echo that and reverberate it around, because I will see in the course of a week many entrepreneurs who have love their technology or love their product and confuse that with a business. And what you're describing is actually a business. You are providing something of value. It's holistic. It's everything from customer service to the code being good, to a great UI, to a good sales process. It's all those things together, right?
And I think people, once tech got to be hot, I think people underestimated to some extent how much the other pieces of the puzzle really matter, and that the competitive barriers in today's internet age, ironically, it can often be the others more than it's the technology. And the technology is key, and so don't get me wrong, we have to keep innovating, we have to keep getting better, and we have to be at the best at that,
Right.
but that's not enough. You need all the rest too.
I mean, it cracks me up, people will say to me, oh, you can start a software company for $25,000. It's like, well, no, you can build a prototype for $20,000. It takes a lot more effort and time and money to build a company.
Yeah, that's really
Can I
good.
follow your
Sure.
line of thought here? Here's a hypothesis as to what the new competitive barrier is. It's owning the conversation around the solution to a problem. It's shaping people's perception, and it's embedded in a network of relationships that extends your culture, makes you part of, an organic part of that, and word of mouth.
I think that's a really good point. I think thought leadership is a big piece of this, and we really care about helping to lead on safety. And right now, safety means, in our world, most narrowly, mobile safety. But frankly, it's about so much more, and what do you do with that information? And for me, having a background in data, and granted it was human genomics and then personal data, but it's how do you think about what you're learning in an aggregated, anonymous way that really allows you to lead and help educate and innovate on safety more broadly.
It's interesting though, because I think personnel, in a funny way, was a great preparation for this business, because, as I remember, personnel, it was, let's get in a position where people own their data, can manage their privacy, and basically understand that they are the value driver of the internet. The whole internet these days is upside down. We get exploited every time we turn on Facebook. We get exploited. The Valley's gotten very good at exploitive business models where they shift externalities and capture the profit. And so whether it's booking a table at a restaurant or it's a taxi service. And so to your point, I think that what I would say is that ultimately, to be successful in business, you have to provide something that is valuable enough to create stickiness. And there's so many different ways in the world to do it. You can do it by having the most amazing sandwiches. You can do it by creating an ecosystem. You can do it by getting people to use your social network and give up your credentials to a point where the switching costs of switching out of Facebook are larger than being part of Facebook. But nobody ever succeeds in business without creating something that, to my mind, customers are grabbing at. They have to want to grab at it. And if you can do that and sustain it, that becomes your intellectual property. But the Supreme Court's basically said, you know what, the software patent stuff, method patent, nonsense. Nonsense. We're not going to let people, get a patent because they figure out how to use a button a different way. Nonsense. But what's never been nonsense is giving customers something that they can't get someplace else. And I wish that everybody who started a consumer internet startup or started a biotech startup or anything understood that ultimately if people don't need it, they're not going to buy it.
Jenny, who owns the data?
Ultimately, when it's anonymous, only the user. So even institutions that are our clients, they do not, they see what gets submitted, which is an anonymous tip about information. So they can look at it, they can look at aggregated data, we give them statistics. Now, if the user submits a tip to their safety officials and they've said, I'm Jenny Abramson and, I see a light that's out or this person's making me uncomfortable, the school has it, right? It's there. But ultimately, the user is the primary owner of the data, and when they give permission and they decide to give stuff, it's more than that. We have aggregated anonymous data that over time, we don't have enough of it yet to be interesting. My hope is that we'll be able to see in a way that respects privacy and everything else, trends in crime and safety and other things that might actually help us make larger systemic changes to really impact, this culture of safety. And so that's my broader hope, but I think we're not quite there yet.
Jimmy, how do you
do the back end, for example, if you have a corporate client that has offices everywhere? It's easy to think how you would at a university.
So we've spent a lot of time, and part of why we're not a nonprofit and we are a for-profit is we really had to invest a lot to get the back end right. I mean, that's, as you all know, as people in tech, that's a bigger part of the technology than the front end and the mobile piece, even though the mobile piece is critical and amazing, and don't tweet that, my mobile developer will take it the wrong way. And so the back end, we have administrative rights, where essentially you can decide who it is in your organization or across parts of the company that can see data, who can actually see and actually do something, push out notifications, respond. So there's different types of rules, and we help any company that we work with or institutions set up those rules that make sense. In some places, let's say it's University of California or someplace else that has different campuses, you know, for them it would probably more make sense to have different dashboards set up for each type, or, you know, and that's the same in holding companies or other places. So it really varies, but the technology makes it very easy to do it for the customer.
So you own the push piece too?
Well, the safety officials will be able to push out, say, a notification to say, you know, it's icy on this side of campus, or, and they can tweet it, they can put it on Facebook, they can do a push notification, so if cell towers are down, they can still get an emergency or, you know, a notification out. We're working on technology that allow them to geo-fence it to certain parts or certain places. And so maybe don't tweet that either, but we're doing a lot of things that really give them the ability to use the tool. And a lot of our product has evolved from our customers, right? We are in a dramatically different place than we might have been had we not listened to our customers, you know, evolved in a way. And now when we take something, for example, to university, mostly what we have, they're happy with. Well, that's not because we're geniuses. That's because we learn from all of their peers, and they're similar enough, even though every school is different, that it actually makes it work out.
It's a follow-up to the back office here. Is that a cloud-based?
Yeah.
And they actually move into IA answer.
Yeah, I won't get too far into our stuff, but yeah, but we are cloud-based, absolutely. Yeah.
Jenny, do you have you mentioned one case where there was an arrest. Do you have a case study laid out of the ideal use that you can share?
So we're working on a white paper right now, and we have various sets of anonymous tips that we've sort of, where we've redacted, you know, we've made it very clear, even not what the institution is, that are incredibly powerful that we could share. And then what we've just finished yesterday is essentially a manual for schools that gives the safety officials a way digitally to walk through how to use this most effectively and all the different steps of doing it that our clients have. So it depends what the purpose is, and I'm happy to talk after we can figure out what would make sense.
I was just interested in curiosity and hearing you know, a little background on the one arrest or anything you could share.
Absolutely. But we do want to do a better job. You know, we've been so cautious, and maybe this is my background in privacy, we've been so cautious not to expose anything of any person or any client or anything that we probably could do a lot more to help make this real for people by giving real examples. And I think when the Georgetown decided on their own to tweet the arrest, I think it helped us see, oh wow, that's actually a much better way to tell the story. We've also we did a CNN piece that ended up getting picked up by about 200 stations around the country. And we had a student at Georgetown University, the vice president of their student government, who spoke a lot on it. And I think that helped begin to paint the picture more than we've really done it. We've really been on the ground just sort of doing our thing.
Jenny, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you so much for
So wonderful.
having me.